preface this by saying, for those of you who say that the California Condor is not actually a Point Lobos bird, it doesn't live in Point Lobos, this is true, but I actually was in the reserve. I don't know if it's the last time they were there, but a few years ago, and in August, there were, I think, 4 or 5 juveniles that were in the grove, the Allen Memorial Grove, while I was on shift. So they do sometimes show up. I, of course, stayed on shift and didn't actually go look at them, which I still regret. But Cindy Mackos did see them. So if you have any questions about what they look like in the reserve, ask her. She said it looked like a small plane going over. Today we have a very exciting presentation about one of California's greatest attractions, the endangered and magnificent California Condor. Andy Kortman is a Condor tour leader, outdoor education instructor, and presenter for Ventana Wildlife Society, and like us has also been a docent. Andy's first experience is interpreting wildlife and sharing his knowledge of ecology with the public were at San Elijo Lagoon Ecological Reserve in Encinitas. He earned his Bachelor's of Science in Ecology and Evolution from UC Santa Cruz, and he's also currently working towards his teaching credential. Today, Andy will discuss the California Condor Reintroduction Program and the natural history of this fascinating and intelligent bird. We will learn about the technology of tracking the condors and how that helps manage the wild flock, and learn some facts and pointers we can use to help our visitors understand the condors and also where best to view them. Please welcome Andy.
Thank you, Stephanie. Hi, I'm Andy Kortman. I work with Ventana Wildlife Society. Ventana Wildlife Society. I like this picture a little bit better because condors are such a huge, iconic bird. And I usually do these presentations with a big condor primary feather. These are their finger feathers. And usually I have a big condor fake egg too that I like to bring around. But I couldn't find it this morning. I do these presentations, I do outdoor education, and in the summer I hang out in Big Sur and I interpret condors to the public down there. And I love Point Lobos. I love Point Lobos. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, the question already.
With your hands, how big an egg is?
Yeah. It's a really big egg. It's about like that. And they stay in the egg for one of the longest times of any bird. It's 58 days in the egg. Yeah. And then they grow up to almost 10 feet in 6 to 8 months. So I'm going to be talking about condors for about 45 minutes, but please, if you have a question, just raise your hand and I'll hopefully answer all the questions that we have. I work with Ventana Wildlife Society. We've been involved with condors since 1997. We didn't get our start with condors though, we actually started with bald eagles. The founder of the organization, Sal Lucido, he has a great piece of property in the Big Sur mountains, and we started releasing bald eagles there back in 1986 to 1993. Bald eagles were locally extinct. They were extirpated in Central California, but thanks to our efforts, they are a sustaining population once again. And you can see them at Lake Nacimiento is a real good place. But also the birds at Pinto Lake up in Watsonville, I believe that's from the same set of birds. And because of our success with bald eagles, the government asked us to help with the Condor Recovery Project. If you remember, in 1987, everyone was real worried about the state of California condors in the wild. There was only 22 birds left in the wild. And among a lot of controversy, they were taken out of the wild, and the captive breeding program was started. And when they were released back into the wild, the captive bred ones, we helped with that. And we're the only not-for-profit organization that does this. We have lots of partners that help us out, like national parks and state parks, and Department of Fish and Game, and Department of Game and Fish in Arizona, and the Oregon Zoo, LA Zoo, San Diego Zoo. This is a symbol for the Peregrine Fund, and they're really important partners. They have a facility in Idaho, and they have a condor breeding program over there. BLM, National Wildlife Refuge System, the USDA, National Park Service. There's a friend of our organization who's taking some of the pictures that I'm going to be using in my presentation. So lots and lots of partners. But we are the only non-profit organization that hangs out with condors and releases condors. We're not part of the captive breeding, we're on the releasing end of side of things. And we do biological monitoring of monarchs, of spotted owl, which the northern spotted owl, southern range ends in Big Sur, and we keep an eye on them. Bald eagles, tricolored blackbirds, lots of different, mostly bird species. And we also run a discovery center at Andrew Malera State Park, and I'm there in the summers. The Discovery Center is only open on the weekends, only from Labor Day to Memorial Day. But we do a lot of public outreach from there. A lot of people come through Big Sur, and they drive right by Point Lobos too if they don't stop, which a lot of them do. A lot of traffic there. But we outreach to a lot of, like millions of people every summer, is what I'm told. The Big Sur community. Our main focus is the California Condor, Gymnogyps californianus. And it's a big bird. It's almost 10 feet long, the wingspan. And it's a real distinct and unique looking bird. They've got red irises. And they have, mostly their heads stay pink, but when they're excited, if they're fighting for a mate or if they're trying to attract a mate, they can flash whites and pinks and purples and oranges. And I've heard that they can even, I've never handled a condor. That's the biologists, they do that. But I've been told that they can flash these colors, you know, just about every second when they're really excited.
Do they have chromatophores? Do you know how to do the flashing?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure if it's like octopus's chromatophores, right? I don't think it's like that. It's not as instantaneous, but apparently it is really quick. And they have a ivory bill that's really sharp. When the condor biologists are working with the condor, it takes 3 of them. One to hold the head, and that's to protect the bird, but to also prevent the bird from nipping or tearing flesh out of the biologist. And then one holds the body, and then the other person takes a blood test and checks on the general health. And they have a really long neck, and that's one of their identifying characteristics. When they fly, it's almost like a heron or an egret, the way they hold their neck in. Whereas a turkey vulture, they have no necks, they're kind of... And turkey vultures are the main thing that the main bird species that people confuse California condors with. And there are a lot of similarities. Here is the crop, where they can, a little bit more about the neck, I'm sorry. They have air sacs that they can inflate in their cheeks and in their neck. Like this one is inflating both cheek and neck air sacs. And it's a way of displaying. Here is their crop. Condors, like many bird scavengers, they gorge. And these California condors can eat 25% of their body weight at one sitting. And they can store a lot of it in this crop. And when their crop is full, you can really see it, and you can see that they've eaten recently. It'll be bulging out, kind of like, more so than this. They have this feathery neck thing going on. They must have used condors for, I think, the villainous Cruella de Vil. She's got the feathers, she's got kind of the look. A lot of bird scavengers, New World vultures, and the distantly related old world vultures have developed a bald head, and part of it is, or most of it is, so that they can keep clean when they're sticking their heads entirely within a carcass. But part of it is also sexual selection too. So sexual selection kind of took these colors and the bald aspect and ran with it. And then when you see them flying, which they do most of the time they are soaring. They hold their wings out really stiff, real straight. Turkey vultures are like this. Condors are like this. And they spread their primary feathers out like that. When they turn, it's just a matter of a little twist of their primary feathers, and they can really turn their whole bodies. And they have these. This bird right here is not quite mature. Mature birds have a real distinct white triangular patch per wing, but this one is kind of growing out of the darker feathers, and you can see it mostly from the bottom and a little bit from the top. And that's not a good. They hold their necks a little weird like that. They also have white legs, and I'm going to talk about that when I get a better picture. So it's not quite 10 feet wingspan. It's about 9.5 feet. Andean condors, it's about 10.5 feet. Andean condors are a little bit bigger. And they can live 50 to 60 years in the wild. And the condors that were taken out of the wild in 1987 haven't been released back into the wild. The danger there is that they would get into carcasses tainted with lead ammunition. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more, but that's the #1 problem for maintaining wild condor population. But the birds that were taken out of the wild in 1987, a lot of them are still alive, but they're kind of reaching that the 50, 60 year mark. So those birds are very valuable. They have a lot to offer. Like ravens, California condors have mentor birds, and they're very social and they share information. So those birds would have a lot of valuable information to share, but the threat of them dying is a little too great to release them back into the wild at this point. Oh, I'm going to need some volunteers for this next part. Can I get a volunteer to help me hold a tape measure? Okay. Thank you very much, Rochelle.
Yes.
All right. So I'm gonna go out to 9.5 feet. So that is a full-grown California condor spreading his wings from feather tip to feather tip.
The feathers are sticking way out.
The feathers are sticking way out, yeah. Andean condor, it's here. So these two are they're each other's closest relatives. There's some extinct relatives that were even bigger. They find in the La Brea tar pits fossil remains of California condor, but what they find more of is this avian scavenger, Teratornis merriami, and it was the closest relative to California condor, but it's extinct now. And it was at 12 feet. Calm down. And then, so that was Pleistocene, I'm pretty sure. In the, if you go farther back, there's a Teratornis incredibilis, and that was, thanks for the show. Oh, yeah. 18 feet was Teratornis incredibilis, and it was a North American species. Huge bird. And back in the Miocene, So much, much longer ago, more in the range of 50 million years ago, they found remains of what they think is the largest bird to have ever lived, and that was Argentavis incredibilis. Oh no, I'm sorry, Argentavis magnificent. And that was a bird whose wingspan was 26 feet. 26 feet. If you want to go to Quetzalcoatlus, which was a pterosaur, not a bird, you go to 3 feet to this. So that was Quetzalcoatlus. It was in North America too, but it wasn't an avian scavenger. It ate fish. And there's another big bird out there that eats fish, like the royal albatross. They're 12 feet. So they have different strategies and different reasons why they have such large wings. Rochelle, if you could just hold on for a little bit longer. So this was Argentavis magnificens, and we had Teratornis incredibili and Teratornis merriami, the Andean condor, California condor. All these bird species are avian scavengers. And when you're an avian scavenger, your next meal is never guaranteed. So you don't know what's on the menu or when it's coming to you. California condors, they like to eat whatever, and they'll eat ground squirrels that are dying or dead. They eat roadkill that we chuck off of the side of the road in Big Sur. But what they really appreciate is big carcasses, sea lions and whales especially. If you could get a beached whale close to condors, they'll have a great year. And whales is another example of something that doesn't eat year-round and all the time. Humpback whales can eat. I don't think it's our population. I think it's the southern hemisphere's population that feed in Antarctica. They'll feed 6 months of the year, and then they don't eat for the rest of the year. They have a very low metabolism. Whales are, of course, helped out by their blubber, which are great energy stores for them that they can cash in on during the off season. But for birds don't have blubber. But birds, avian scavengers, have very low metabolisms. There's a question?
Yeah, and the ancient birds, how much did they weigh? How big were their weight like?
That's harder to tell, and I don't know. But they have a hard time figuring that out. Like with Argentavis magnificens, they figured, they kind of extrapolated this length from, I think, one wing bone. Yeah. So it takes some imagination. But, which is also very important for conserving wild animals, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, is a good imagination. Avian scavengers who don't know where their next meal is coming want to have a low metabolism. Yes?
Are there any instances of these birds eating other live birds? Because we've been watching black oyster catchers, and we know that not condors, but turkey vultures have been threatening the pig and the chick.
The oyster catchers.
Yeah.
The only documented case of a California condor having eaten something live was, and I believe they were opening its gut to get the lead, little bits of lead ammunition out, and they found mussels. So mussels would have been taken live from a rock, probably, but that's the only
But how about the
documented.
turkey vulture, do you know?
I don't know about the turkey vulture, but I can imagine. Well, it's a little harder to imagine because scavenging is almost a specialized strategy. So when you're a scavenger, you have all these adaptations to help you keep your metabolism low, and it might not work out if you're eating live prey. So you have a big body mass to surface area. If you think about a little shrew, they're losing a lot of body heat just through their skin. But a whale or another Argentavis magnificens isn't going to lose a lot of heat or energy through the surface area. And then these avian scavengers were soarers. They didn't flap their wings a whole bunch. So if you can imagine a hawk actively foraging for prey, that's not what condors do. Turkey vultures not quite, and these guys probably not so much either. They would soar. And thank you, Rochelle.
So, are these animals, are they hollow bones?
Yes, they're hollow bones. Yeah, they are hollow bone. They have every adaptation to keep them light as they can, but California condors do weigh 20 to 25 pounds. There's a question back here.
What do you feed the condors in captivity?
What do they feed them in captivity? I'm not sure, but what we feed them in Big Sur is calf carcasses. So there's a lot of carcasses that the dairy industry throws off, and we tap into that with the local dairies. I have a question over here first.
Yeah, I wonder about the function of the feathers on the wingtip. Is that what allows them to turn, like flap in a wind and an airplane?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh.
So
It's controllable then.
yeah, it's controllable. They give those primary feathers a little twist to turn, and it helps them keep their wings just outstretched, not moving. Really, this is kind of like a relaxed position for condors, and it all goes back to keeping a low metabolism. Yeah, so they just turn those to turn a big time like that. One of the identifying characteristics of the California condor is that they make the biggest circle when they're looking for food. They're an average circle when they're flying takes about 16 seconds, which if you think about a turkey vulture, they're kind of going in and out and being blown by the wind. A hawk, it takes 5 or 6 seconds, but a condor, when it's high up, will take 16 seconds. Yes?
Where do they keep these condors that are in captivity?
In San Diego Zoo has a facility, LA Zoo has a facility, and they're big facilities.
I would think so, yeah, more than one place there.
Yeah.
And then the condors that are out in the wild now, do they eggs,
They
but in captivity, and then you guys said, boom, let them go?
not quite. I'll get into that pretty soon. I have some pictures that will help me explain. Yes.
Do the condors have a way to latch their wings into place outspread like an albatross does?
Oh, I didn't know about that part about the albatross. Albatrosses latch their wings out like that to keep them relaxed. I'm not sure, but I'm assuming that this is more relaxed for a condor than maybe even hanging out like this. Yeah. And the way that their foraging behavior is also helps them keep a low metabolism too. They're not actively foraging like a hawk. They fly up so high, 10,000 feet is what my colleagues tell me, and they kind of take in the whole landscape. And they're not only, and condors, let me phrase it this way, turkey vultures are adapted to living in the woods. Turkey vultures have one of the most highly developed senses of smell of any animal. So a deer carcass that was killed by a mountain lion, and maybe the mountain lion ate the heart, lungs, and liver and stashed the body under some leaves, under some oak trees, is not a problem for a turkey vulture. But all that hiddenness a condor might have a hard time finding. However, condors look for congregations of turkey vultures, or coyotes, or anything like that. So condors 10,000 years ago, condors used to be throughout North America. And we have this really interesting fossil remains. These fossils were found near either, I think it was a mastodon hunting camp, which would have been a real cold area. But most of them kind of in hot and dry areas. But 10,000 years ago, they would have been all over. In the Eocene epoch, which is about 50 million years ago, grass was a new thing. Later on, like in the Miocene, grasslands spread out from Africa and established themselves in various parts of the world. And in North America, that was kind of the beginnings of the Great Plains. I think it's 30 million years ago, something like that. Those grasslands supported really big grazers. Sorry, my corner's going all over the place. Really big grazers here in the middle of the country. If you can imagine mastodons and mammoths and megatherium, giant sloth, which was bigger than an elephant, and horses and camels and big grazing animals that leave behind big carcasses. It was a good time to be a condor. And there was some of these extinct cathartids, is what you call a New World vulture. There were more cathartid diversity at that time than at any other time, and more individual cathartids around that time. But starting around 10,000 years ago, some of those big grazers started going extinct. So in their quest to find big carcasses, the range of condors shifted westward, where you still had big carcasses from mammals, but it's marine mammals. It's marine mammals that really supported at least condors on the west coast for a long time. Now there are condors in the Grand Canyon, and they're not eating marine mammals. And actually there's a Baja California population and a Southern California population. They're not really eating marine mammals right now. Sometime in the future they might get to it. But our big Sir condors definitely eat marine mammals. And they love sea lions and they love whales. And they'll eat anything. They'll eat whatever beaches itself dead on the shore. But it was really, that's what sustained condors' persistence here, or existence, I should say. And Lewis and Clark found condors at the mouth of the Columbia River, and those condors were feeding on whales. This is at a place in Big Sur, north of Julia Pfeiffer, Burns Park, and south of Nepenthe. We call this Sea Lion Cove. So Point Lobos has a Sea Lion Point. We have a cove. Big Sur, the geology of it, it has those big steep hills right up next to the coast. But those don't end at the water. They keep going deep underwater. And there's very little space to get a wide beach. And there's not a lot of beaches for many miles of Big Sur coastline. But where there are, sea lions and other pinnipeds will come and haul out by the hundreds, and they're often dying of exhaustion or shark bites. And there's usually at least one carcass at this place that we call Sea Lion Cove, and it's a great place to look for California condors. And besides the one instance of them eating mussels, they're obligate scavengers. So they have to wait for something to die in order to eat. And they use the natural openings of a carcass to stick their heads entirely within that animal, and they'll eat it from the inside out. So you can see this one is feeding, and these other ones are waiting their turn. But while they wait, they're standing guard too. So it's an effective strategy to get a lot of condors fed from one carcass.
They have such
Is there
an
a
ugly
pecking
head.
order?
I'm sorry,
Is there a pecking order?
pecking order. Yes, there's definitely a pecking order. The older birds eat first and the younger birds sometimes don't eat. Yes.
I mean, they're standing guard, who might attack them?
Oh, so I mentioned before that lead is the number one issue preventing condors from being a self-sustaining population in the wild. That's true. The number one natural threat is coyotes. And coyotes at a carcass site might jump up and grab a condor out of the air. A condor with its 10 feet wings isn't very graceful taking off. And actually, the Argentavis magnificens and those other big birds, they think that those birds wouldn't have even run to take off, that those birds would have been limited to places where there's sea stacks and cliffs where they could just drop off. And that's why Point Lobos is such a exciting thing to think about for condor expansion as they're going up north, because there is great rocks, there's tons of pinnipeds. It seems like a great place for condors. Yes.
Do we know why they haven't done that already?
Why they haven't done that? Condors are also very cautious. They're very intelligent, they're very cautious. And in the condors' natural behaviors, that with the social aspects, that works out for them. Being smart, but also being very cautious. There was a whale that washed up in Big Sur this year, early this summer, and the condors, it floated away eventually, but it was there long enough that the condors had an opportunity to do it, but they were freaked out by the waves. They would go down there and they couldn't deal with the waves. Another whale that washed up about 4 years ago stayed there, and eventually they started eating from it, and after they were comfortable with the carcass, then they would play in the waves. But they will wait and make sure that something is dead for a long, long time. They're very cautious, and it pays off. And so we have about 4 feeding sites that we bring these calf carcasses to, and then we supplement their diet. And they're spread out in the mountains of Big Sur. But our newest facility is in Palo Corona, and it's from that feeding site that we're hoping to attract birds that then will go to Point Lobos. We have a feeding site so near San Simeon and the elephant seals that they just haven't discovered it yet. Yeah, once they do, it's going to be a great time again to be condors. Once they find out about Point Lobos, I think it's going to be similar. Yeah. Yes?
How far out into the water will they go if they see a floating whale? My wife and I actually saw 2 large birds, and we didn't see them fly, so I can't testify that they were condors, but they were sitting on and feeding in the water on a piece of light-colored stuff. I assume it was a big chunk of blubber from the water. It was quite a ways offshore.
I haven't heard of condors doing that, but I have seen turkey vultures feeding on something in the kelp like a egret does. But that's a great question. I'll ask my colleagues. Normally, though, I would think, or just as a guess, I would think that the open ocean would be a little too much for them. Yes?
Do the condors defer to turkey vultures if they get there first, or do they scare them away?
No, condors dominate at a carcass site. But they think that one of the reasons why condors and other avian scavengers evolved to be highly intelligent was because there are so many different species at a carcass, and you have to know what a coyote is going to do versus a raven, versus a bald eagle or golden eagle, which also scavenge, versus rats. So they dominate as far as birds go, just by their size. And if there's a golden eagle, they might give the golden eagle a little bit of time, because the golden eagle is a little bit add a foot to my arms here, and you have a golden eagle with killing talons and a killing beak. Condors, they're more, it's not talons like overgrown toenails. It's not for clutching. And their beaks, although can easily rip flesh from bone, it's not really for attacking. But just with their size, they can pretty much scare off other animals. I'll say this interesting bit. In 1987, when they were taken out of the wild, they kind of lost that knowledge that they were better than golden eagles at a sight, or what to do. So when the captive bred condors were released into the wild, they had to figure that out, and they had to figure out the hierarchy of other scavengers. And there was some bloodshed with golden eagle interactions, which the condors don't want to fight, but they had to figure it out with some fighting. But now it's condors will dominate the site. I'm going to go to question back here. Yes.
Golly, you bring up so many points. Two quick questions. What does the proximity of people do to feeding condor? And you just brought up the point of behaviors perhaps being passed on. Is there a culture with condors where adults will pass on behaviors to the next generation?
Good question. Yeah, there's definitely a culture. Or I've stopped quoting it anymore. I just call it condor culture. And from 1987 to 1992, there was a loss of continuation of that culture, and we're still kind of dealing with the after effects of that. They're very social birds. Bachelors hang out in their own flock and roost in the same trees, and perhaps like ravens, exchange information somehow so they know where to go the next day. And I'm sorry, your first question?
And how does the effect of people
Affect behavior.
carcass side affect feeding?
Right. On the one that snakes through Big Sur, that cuts right through condor foraging habitat, condor nesting habitat. They'll come right to the pullouts and stand on the guardrails, so that they are not so concerned with the presence of people or with even cars. But we don't, it's not healthy for them. They end up, one of them has been hit by a car. He's still with us, but he's got a big crack down his nose. But what happens is that they get into, and it's especially when they're rearing their chicks, and the chicks go from that egg to the 10 feet in 6 to 8 months, that their calcium demand is outrageous. And the parents switch off, mom and dad switch off, feeding the chick stuff that they find out and about. Normally what they would be looking for is shells and bits of bone to get that calcium. But what ends up happening when the pullouts are littered is that they get cigarette butts and bottle caps and stuff. Every person involved with Ventana Wildlife Society and all our volunteers, we pick up trash every time we go out. So I led a coastal cleanup day in September, and every time we go out we're picking up trash, but it's especially important during the summer when they're raising the chicks. Yeah, it's not good for condor to be near humans, but they don't seem to mind. The distantly related old world vultures have also evolved low metabolism, or that was probably the constraint, evolved soaring capabilities, bald heads, because they all feed in this way. And yeah, they're very social. While they're waiting, they're standing guard, and they'll fly out together to a carcass. So people have known about the decline of condor populations for a long time, but they didn't know why. And in 1982, it was estimated 22 condors were there. They did that, this was only with the Southern California population, and this was before tags and transmitters. They did it with a corps of volunteers and with a big data set of photographs, and they would count the birds and compare them to the photographs. In 1982, they estimated 22 birds left. And in 1987, they took them out of the wild. And the captive breeding was started. So this is about 100 years ago. 100 years ago, they were all the way up here and around here. But then after the Big Sur population became extinct early in the 20th century, condors were pretty only much in this area. And they would go, there's a San Joaquin Valley, and then these are the foothills. Sierra is up here, Sierra Nevada Mountains. But then they're patrolling the foothills. And what used to be there was lots of elk. Elk's a huge carcass. But then in the Spanish days, the Spanish did a lot of ranching, and those were good areas for their cattle. And that worked fine for condors, especially since the Spanish were only interested in the hides, and they would take the hides and leave the rest of the carcass. That was a boon to condors and a boon to California grizzlies, which were also scavengers. I like to imagine Point Lobos in the past and in the future, maybe not with the grizzlies, but I like to imagine grizzlies and condors at Point Lobos and whales, all that. I think it could happen. But in 1987, there was just this Southern California population, and that's who we get our genetic stock from for the rest of for the condors today. And during that time when condors were taken out of the wild, they actually put Andean condors in California for a couple of years to see where they would go. And a couple of the California condors were raised by Andean condors. And here they are. They out of the nest, they're a real light-colored fluff ball, but then they grow these feathers, and they have these facial feathers that they lose. And then after 5 to 6 years, they're here. They always retain this forehead mustache. But yeah, this one is ready to breed after 5 to 6 years. And males and females, good luck telling them apart without a blood test. And we've even had an issue where we thought that one was a male and it wasn't, and it went back to a mistake that a zoo veterinarian did, because it's really hard to sex these birds. And so I think in about another month, if you go and find condors, they might be doing this. And this is the courtship that they do. The male lifts his wings like that, and he'll circle the female like that, and he picks up his feet like that. It's really slow. And then when she accepts him, she'll bite him on the face. And then there's a lot of biting on the face back and forth. But they mate for life. They mate for life. I wanted to point out right here, Stephanie said that to help interpret condors once they get to Point Lobos, you might appreciate interesting factoids and funny things. So notice their legs. They're not naturally white. That's an adaptation that they have to keep cool in a hot and dry environment. And storks are the only other birds that do this. So before DNA analysis, they knew that New World vultures and storks were related. Both New World vultures and storks pee on their legs. Well, it's not the pee, it's more the poo. It's the white stuff. It's the white stuff. They separate out the white stuff from the black stuff, and they spray it on their legs. And that's a paste that hardens as it dries. They have lots of blood vessels in their legs. And so as the blood spends a lot of time in their legs, it's getting cooled down by that evaporative effect. And so once the blood gets back in their body, it's cooler than before, and it helps keep them cool. The Southern California population, they nest in such a hot and dry area. It's the mountains north of Santa Paula and Fillmore, which is just really hot and dry, especially in the summer. But this is one of the ways that they keep cool. And they mate for life. And they're very sociable, fly together too. This, I think, is mom, dad, and son down here.
So I have a question about this poop paste.
Yeah.
So they must have a fragrance all their own.
Oh,
This must help in identifying each other, doesn't it? Or
and she asked whether the fragrance helps in identification among birds. They don't know that condors actually use their sense of smell.
okay.
In experiments where they've tried to discern that, they can't eke out that information. So they think that condors don't have a very developed sense of smell, and that a lot of their brain space is devoted to optics. And actually, we have a clone of a condor skull at our Andrew Malera Discovery Center, and it's got these big holes connecting the eyes to the brain and big openings for optic nerves and stuff. And the nostril isn't as big as a turkey vulture. I mean, a turkey vulture is a huge nostril that you can look all the way through. And if you see a turkey vulture skull, they have lots of surface area in their nasal passages to get those molecules. But condors, maybe not. Condors do stink. And the biologists that I work with, that's one of the things they always mention. And if you get a close enough flyby, they don't make a lot of noise, so you might not hear them, but you can smell them when they fly close enough to you. There's a captive condor that is kind of an ambassador for condors. She lives at the LA Zoo, and she comes to our big fundraisers, and they let me smell her up close. But she smells fine. Just life at the zoo, you know, she probably gets baths and stuff. But the wild ones really stink. And so captive, biologists will take a egg out of the wild. Sometimes the mom and the dad are too closely related, or they think that if the chick grows up in that flock, there's too much of a chance of inbreeding, or maybe first-time parents lay their egg on the edge of a cliff. And they don't build nests. No New World vultures build nests. They kind of just find, and actually they don't find, they know about from their incredible memory, a selection of caves that are suitable for nests. But a first-time parent might lay an egg too close on the edge, and that's a good opportunity for us to grab that egg and raise the chick in captivity. And we switch eggs all around from Idaho, Grand Canyon, wherever there's captive breeding, or we'll take wild eggs wherever those populations are, and we'll raise the chicks in strategic places. The chicks, when I think they're less than a year, when they get ready to be assimilated into a wild flock, I think all the Grand Canyon, Southern California, Baja California, and us, we all have these pins where the condors can interact. Wild condors can interact with the captive condor through this pin. And the young condor spends 6 months, I think. It's a really long time, and I'm not sure why. long time in this pen acclimating to the wild flock.
Are they very vocal?
They're not very vocal. They like other New World vultures, they don't vocalize. They can make these weird sounds, but they're making them somewhere else, and it sounds like gagging and puking.
So they're not communicating that way?
They're not what?
Not communicating vocally?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. But there's lots of nuzzling, like a breeding pair wraps their heads around each other, and there's lots of touching and that. And I mean, this is the best we can do with just the mesh between them. But we have our facility like this up in Big Sur, and we can also, if there's not a captive condor in here, we can raise these mesh walls and get the condors to come in. We'll bait the area with a calf carcass and get them all to come in, and then 3 biologists at a time, we can check their health and check their lead levels. I wanted to get into the lead issues. This is where we release it. You can see the snow in the background. It's way up there. They have the transmitters and the big ID numbers so that it's kind of a citizen science thing where anyone can call in an observation of a condor. And we really appreciate all the data we can get on these condors. We want to know where they are. Some of them even have GPS. And from that GPS data, we can see kind of a highway from Pinnacles to Big Sur. And they don't stop, there's nothing for them in Salinas Valley anymore. There used to be elk and there used to be cattle. Now it's just agriculture. But they'll just make a beeline to Big Sur and then spread out on the coast. Or they'll go to Pinnacles, and from the spine of those mountains, they can catch those currents all the way up to Mount Diablo or down south. And with their transmitters, we can pick up the signal with an antenna like this. And they nest in redwood trees. They've nested in, we've seen them, most of the time they nest in cliffs. And that's throughout all the populations. The Southern California population used to nest in giant sequoias. And it's where lightning might have struck the tree and an area was burned out in the tree. So it's real safe from ground predators. And then it's hidden from ravens and golden eagles that would want to eat a chick. But around Big Sur, they nest in redwood trees. I wanted to get into, I keep talking about lead, I want to tell how it happens. So there was a long decline of the population of condors and they didn't know why. It wasn't until there was a shift in strategies for conservation that they wanted to do more of a hands-on approach, and the condors got the wing tags and the transmitters. They followed the condors to their nest sites, and they tried to find out everything they could about the condors. And it wasn't until with the transmitters that they were able to find a recently deceased condor. And they did that a bunch of times, and they found the main thing that was killing the condors was lead poisoning. Lead poisoning. And they're not being shot, although that has definitely been a thing. A big bird like this, back in 1800s, would have been a target for pioneer or something. This part right here was used to store an ounce of gold dust back in the gold rush days. So they would kill a condor for this part, because there was no plastic or glass vial might break on you. So they used this part to store their gold dust. But the lead ammunition they get from a carcass, from an animal that was killed with lead ammunition. And it could either happen with a hunter whose prey gets away from him, and in Big Sur that could happen. There is hunting in Fort Hunter Liggett and in the Ventana Wilderness. And you know, Big Sur's got these hills covered in poison oak. It could be real easy to lose a wounded animal. condors and turkey vultures get sick too. Coyotes get sick from lead poisoning. Bald eagles and golden eagles get sick too. But the social way in which condors feed, a whole bunch of condors can get sick from one lead-tainted carcass. So it can happen with hunting. It happens with ranching. That if you kill a varmint on your ranch, you might not be interested in getting that animal back. So we work with local ranches and we work with hunters. We give out copper bullets, which lead is really a cheap ammunition. Copper is a couple steps up, but we're invested in Condor's future. This is the way that we're doing it. We're giving away copper bullets. Yes?
I know there's a lot of controversy with beer. What's the actual cost difference between the two bullets, like lead-free versus, I mean, is it?
It's like 10 times, I think. Or no, I'm sorry. I don't think it's 10 times. It's something like twice as much. It's definitely
Twice as much?
twice as much, I
I
believe.
mean, so overall, I would think that'd be a very, very minor cost of a hunting trip, right?
Yeah. You're going to want to spend some time at the range too. The ballistics are different between lead and copper, so there's some, it takes a little bit of getting used to. But most of the time when hunters find out, like in 1989, lead shot for waterfowl was banned because there was a big push to educate people about what the bottoms of these lakes and stuff looked like, and they were just slabs of lead. When people found out about that, they changed their ways, hunters changed their ways, because no one wants to be responsible for putting a general poison into the environment. But yeah, hunters are, I don't know about Point Lobos Docents, but for me at Andrew Malera State Park, not a lot of hunters come by and visit. So we have to go and find them. And then we talk to all our ranching neighbors. But one of the strategies that we're doing is that we're trying to keep them on the coast. California Condors are trying to keep them on the coast so that they have lead-free sources of food. So we have our various feeding stations on the spine of Big Sur. We're trying to keep them on the coast. We're trying to make it more attractive for them. And our new feeding station, Palo Corona, is there to get condors to come to Point Lobos eventually, which is about as far north as we want them because it's so developed beyond that. Pajaro Valley, though, was named that because of condors. So they used to be all over the place. But Point Lobos is about as far north as we want to get them. Yes, and I think I must be running short on time. Yes, question.
Fascinating that and first, to do what you all do in biologists is incredibly labor intensive. I mean, hats off to you. And yes. But she had fabulous pictures of these guys just climbing these redwood trees, going into the nest. If memory serves me correctly, raising a chick in the wild has not been as successful. So you do go into the nest, you take the eggs out, you put in a dummy egg, and then you go back when that egg is about to hatch, or after the chick is hatched. I can't remember that.
It's usually best to do it, we know it takes 58 days to hatch, so we'll put the egg back in the nest on day 56 or 57, something like that.
That's an incredible amount of work to do that and ensure that that chick does hatch. Amazing.
It's very amazing, and I'm not one of the biologists that does this. I'm just with the education and outreach, which is just as important. But these guys' work, I mean, they're climbing up these huge redwoods. The picture I showed with the snow in the background, that biologist actually died while working because of the dangerous conditions. He was killed by a storm and a falling branch. It's very dangerous work. We're all about safety now, and the biologists, it's funny, they're entering data on life histories, they're also picking up trash, and they're also reading up on how best to do rock climbing. It's a lot of different skills coming together.
I have a question about the genetic diversity of the gene pool. With only 22 or whatever it was condors to begin with, it must be, what's the risk? Have you noted diseases going through the population, or do they seem to be robust to them?
They are more robust than other species to the effects of inbreeding. However, the condors in the Grand Canyon, they mostly all have scoliosis. And we think it's from the limited gene pool. But overall, they seem to be pretty resilient against that, which is amazing. There's only 22 birds. Now there are 420 birds, and most of them are healthy. Most of them are healthy.
Can they interbreed with Andean? Can they interbreed with the condors and the Andes?
They can't. They cannot. But some of the California condors were raised by Andean condors, so Andean condors served as foster chicks. However, apparently those Andean condors are mean parents. I don't know if it's the foster situation, but the condors that grew up under them, now that they're having some chicks, are a little violent to their own chicks. Yeah. Yes?
We had a speaker that talked about how they train the captive condors to stay away from the wires by gently letting them land on some not so hot wires. But then those condors seem to transmit that knowledge to their chicks. Is there anything else that they you see that they transmit, like information about dangerous animals or anything like that? Do you see any evidence in other spheres?
I can see related individuals and individuals that hang out together. They're able to find carcasses real quick. So there's some information being passed. I don't know if they're just following each other and just that they're together so much might lead them to those discoveries. But as far as now with the power lines, we actually have a mock power line in here that gives them about a 5-volt zap. And that's enough to teach them for life. When they're flying all with each other, and when the bachelors have their flock, they're all learning from each other and avoiding these places where one of them avoids. And yeah, I'm not sure. That's a good question. And they're very social birds, I know, but how to communicate about something so specific. But I know that they can communicate when there's a good carcass, like a whale. They must say, like, hey, good eating over here, and then they'll all come. But yeah, that's pretty specific. I don't know how they would be able to communicate.
Okay, I think we're going to have to wrap it up.
Okay.
Thank you very much.